Likutei Sichos, Chelek of Dalet, Volume 24, the Sicha for Chag HaSukkos. This Sicha will explain the connection between Simchas Beis HaShe'eva and the Nisuch HaMayim, the libation of the water, with the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah and the four species, the lulav and esrog. And it will explain also how it gets expressed in our avodah as Jews in the time of the Beis Hamikdash and in the time of Golus. So as an introduction to familiarize ourselves with some concepts to better flow through the Sicha. So in the Beis Hamikdash, in addition to the actual offering of livestock, they also offered wine in the form of libation. They would pour wine on the Mizbeach, and this is what happened a whole year, including Sukkos. However, on Sukkos there was an addition. That is, that the Torah, the Chachamim learned from the Torah that there also has to be libation of water. They would pour water alongside the pouring of the wine on the Mizbeach. Now, how would this happen? They would draw the water the night before, and then in the morning, by the offering of the Karban Tamid, when they poured the wine, that's when they would pour the water. Now, the drawing of the water at night called for great festivities, great joy, as we know, as the verse says, and we say it every Motzei Shabbos, "Usha'afta mayim b'sasayim," that you should, quote, draw water with great joy. And they would rejoice and dance the entire night as an expression of this joy. To the extent that the sages tell us, one who did not experience this joy, did not see real true joy in his whole life, meaning never experienced real true joy. So that's one thing to be familiar with. Another thing is the difference between makif versus pnimi. Makif, perhaps you can translate it something all-encompassing or superficial, and pnimi is something which is internalized, something that you actually connect with in a specific manner. Two examples for this, perhaps general faith. We know that the Gemara tells us that there are many people that have faith. Almost everybody has faith. Everybody believes in a God on some level. However, for some people, it's so superficial that it doesn't connect literally to their reality. That ganva pumachtarta rachmana, that sometimes a thief, before he's breaking in, he calls out to God. So he does believe in God, but yet it's not enough to affect him. It's not enough to stop him from doing his evil actions. Now, in the sukkah versus the lulav, we also have this. When one performs the mitzvah of sukkah, it's in a way of makif, because you go into the sukkah, you don't touch the sukkah, you don't have to actually feel the sukkah. The sukkah surrounds you. It's something that's all-encompassing, but it's something superficial. Whereas the daled minim, the four species, the esrog and the lulav, you actually have to hold it in your hand, you have to shake it, you have to bring it to your body, you have to feel it. That is something more specific, more pnimi. Just please note that in the Beis Hamikdash, of course, the celebration of Sukkos, the actual Yontif, was only one day, of course. Another concept to be familiar with, the idea that the Gemara tells us that whenever there is a debate, whether in Mishnah or in Gemara, Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim, literally translated, these and these are the word of the living God. That means that even though you have opposing opinions, but still both of them are consistent and have a place in the thinking and the intellect of Torah. Both of them are spiritually true. However, the halacha can only be done like one, and there are formulas the way halacha is decided. Another thing to be familiar with, we know that the neshama, our soul, has 5 levels, the highest of which is called yechida, which means unified. It is one and unified with Hashem himself, with the essence of Hashem. That is the essence of the soul, and that gets expressed on Yom Kippur, which the Torah calls Achas Pashana. That is the one day of the year. That is the one unique day of the year on which this one and unique aspect of the soul becomes revealed. Finally, the verse in reference to the 4 species, it says, Ulakachtem lochem bayom harishon. The Torah says, you shall take to you on the first day, and the first day of Sukkos. And you see the Torah stresses, there's an emphasis on to you. That means it has to belong to you. And there is, as we'll see in the Sicha, there's a connection to you. And then the Torah concludes, Usmachtem lefnei Hashem Elokeichem. After describing the 4 species, the Torah says, and you shall rejoice before Hashem. So let's get into the Sicha. So in regards to the joy of Sukkos that we find at this festival, we see that in addition to the actual joy of the festival itself, there are also some joys that are simcha, that are connected specifically to certain actions. You have, number one, the joy that is connected to the taking of the four species, the Daled Minim. And as I just said in the introduction, because the Torah says, and you should rejoice before Hashem. So we see that it's connected to joy. And then of course we have the Nisuch Hamayim, and the drawing of the water, the libation of the water, and the drawing of it, as it says, as we said in the introduction, Ush'afta Mayim B'sasen. Now, the order of these two things, which one comes first? Well, this is contingent on a dispute and a debate between the Tanoim in the Mishnah. One Tana says that the Nisuch Hamayim, the actual pouring of the water, did not begin on the first day of Sukkos, but rather on the second day. Well, following that, when would the drawing of the water be? As we said in the introduction, the night before. So therefore, they would, according to this opinion, they wouldn't draw the water until the second night, and then it comes out that this is being done after we had already performed the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, of the four species, on the first day. However, the second opinion, which is the halacha, is that no, the pouring, the libations of the water were all 7 days, and then of course it comes out that the drawing of the water took place already on the very first night of Sukkos, which is prior to the performance of the mitzvah of the lulav and esrog, because the lulav and esrog you only do by day. It says by yom, on the day. But this, the mitzvah of Sukkot, the mitzvah of drawing the water is the night before, which obviously is the first night of Sukkot. Now, according to the rule which we mentioned, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, that both of them are the words of the living God, we will have to conclude that both opinions that we just mentioned have a place and are consistent, at least in the spiritual aspect of things. Moreover, although we see in actuality, like we just said, the halacha is that in fact they began to draw the waters the night before. However, in the actual simcha, meaning the actual amplification of the simcha, did not take place until the second night, for the very obvious fact that the first night, which is still Yontif, you're not allowed to play, as the Gemara describes, the Mishnah describes, the Gemara describes, you're not allowed to play the Khalil, the flutes, and all the musical instruments. And therefore, although there was a simcha, but it wasn't a full-fledged simcha that happened only the second night, on which was already Chol HaMoed, and that's when the music really, started to really play, and that's when they had the true simcha. Now, it's true that you can make the argument, well, this is only because of a side reason. It's not inherent in the simcha of Simchas Pesach She'eva itself. That is true. But since everything in the Torah is exact, and everything is consistent, therefore we must say that although this is for a, so to speak, an outer reason, not for the reason of Simchas Pesach She'eva itself, but still yet the fact that there is still a difference in the level of joy between the first night and the second night is also very telling. So back to the point, both of them have a point. How are we going? Both of these opinions have a point and are consistent with the spiritual aspect of things. How are we going to understand this? Says the Rebbe by prefacing an explanation and the general connection between the libation of the water and Sukkos. Why is it on Sukkos? What is the connection? Well, one of the differences between the libations of wine versus water is that wine brings out joy, but it's an understandable joy. It's a joy that we can relate to. Because really wine is something that inherently brings out joy in the natural sense of things. Not just spiritually speaking, but it brings out joy. You drink wine, and wine is synonymous with joy. So even though in this case it's a simcha of a mitzvah, because you're not pouring it for joy, you're pouring it on the mizbeach, but still the general idea of it, that wine is synonymous with joy, that is something natural. That is something realistic even in our lives. However, water, the libation of water, water naturally do not, bring out any particular joy. They're not synonymous with joy. And therefore, the fact that this water, the water is on Sukkos, when Hashem says, I want you to pour the water, and that this should be done with joy, this is a joy which is not connected to nature. This is something which is exclusively because this is the joy of Hashem himself, for whatever reason. But this is not something that we rejoice in because we can relate to. And therefore, the rejoicing of the Nisuch HaMayim, of the pouring of the water, of the libations of the water, and the drawing of the water, this brought out something which is totally beyond any limit and measure, versus the joy that it was associated with the pouring of the wine, or on a typical day, didn't elicit an exceptional joy like the pouring of the water. Now, it's explained and well known that every single Jew has his quote-unquote mizbeach, his altar. Every Jew has, every Jewish body is considered to be like a Beis HaMikdash. So everybody obviously has their Holy of Holies, and they have their altar, which typically, I believe, is associated with the heart. So this means that we need to appreciate this, how this relates, these two aspects, the pouring of the wine, the libations of the wine and libations of the water, how they relate, how they translate into our spiritual avodah of Hashem. So Nisuch HaYayin, the libations of the wine, is a simcha of a mitzvah. When one rejoices at doing a mitzvah, which is achieved through his bainanus, through contemplation, using your mind, coming to a conclusion, understanding, for example, that, hey, wow, look how lucky we are that Hashem chose us to give us this mitzvah, such a special mitzvah, especially when you understand the aspects of the mitzvah. This brings out a joy in the person. This brings the person to a state of joy, a simcha shel mitzvah. However, since this simcha is generated by and connected with a person's intellect and understanding, therefore, first of all, it's not a full-fledged bittul. The person himself is felt, because the person is, and his seichel and his intellect is a contributing factor to this joy. Moreover, therefore, this simcha is limited in a sense. Why? Because it's limited in accordance with the person's understanding and appreciation. Obviously, somebody who has a better understanding, a better spiritual appreciation of things, will have a greater joy than one versus one who has a simpler and more elementary level understanding and appreciation of spirituality. However, when it comes to the mode of avodah, of nisuch hamayim, of the libations of water in a person's avodah, that is an example of a simcha shel mitzvah that is beyond any rationale, that is beyond any intellect. That if a yid is in a mode of mesiras nefesh, totally and absolutely devoted, given over to Hashem and his will, Hashem's desires, and just by virtue of the fact that he knows that Hashem wants him to do something, without understanding it, without even thinking deeply into it, that how lucky he is and so on and so forth, but rather just the mere fact that Hashem wants something done, that elicits a joy in the person. This is, quote-unquote, the true joy, the ultimate joy. Why? Because this type of joy, which is associated with mesiras nefesh, this touches, this reaches the etzem hanefesh, the essence of the soul, which is beyond any koiches hagluyim. And therefore, the joy that comes through it is so great. That's where the Chachamim tell us. One who didn't see such a joy, one who didn't experience such a joy, never experienced true joy. Because whatever joy you may have experienced is limited by nature, limited by definition. It's constrained. This is the general connection between Sukkos and Simchat Sheva. What is the Simcha of Sukkos? So we know that Sukkos comes after and as a result of the avodah of Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Shuvah, and Yom Kippur. Most specifically, Yom Kippur. As it's explained that the Sukkah represents the Anan HaKtoides, that cloud of the incense, of the smoke of the incense, which creates like a cloud in which one finds himself encompassed in. This is what the Sukkah is symbolic of. So in other words, there's a special connection, a direct connection between the mitzvah of Sukkah, Chag HaSukkos, and specifically Yom Kippur. Now, what is the avodah of Yom Kippur? The avodah of Yom Kippur is connected to the yechida of the level of the soul, which is the etzem hanefesh, the essence of the soul. What is the idea of Sukkos? That all these aspects, all these ideas, all the everything we accomplished on Rosh Hashanah, as Shuvah, or as we said, specifically and especially on Yom Kippur, they should all be drawn down, and not in a revealed manner. Not just remain in the abstract, but they should come down lepoil in actuality and be expressed in all the aspects of the person. This gets expressed in the sukkah specifically. Because what do you see in the sukkah? What happens? A person goes into the sukkah, and there, what does he do? He doesn't do any mitzvahs per se. There he does whatever he would do at home. He does his own matters. In other words, it gets expressed in his own personal life. Whether it's reading, whether it's eating, whether it's resting, whether it's just talking to friends, you have to do all these things in the sukkah. This is what expresses the etzem hanefesh. And therefore the nisuch hamayim, the libations of the water, was on Chag HaSukkos. And therefore, of course, also the drawing of the water, because this is a joy that transcends any tam vadas, any limitations of reasoning and logic. Now, we know that the mitzvah of lulav is not just a mitzvah that happens to coincide with Sukkos, but rather the mitzvah of lulav is inherently connected to the mitzvah of sukkah, to Sukkos. And we actually see this in halacha. An expression of this in halacha is that the halacha calls for making the bracha over the daled minim, making the bracha over the lulav and esrog, specifically in a sukkah, because it's connected to the sukkah. We do it even if it's raining in the sukkah. We go into the sukkah to make a bracha. What is the idea of this? This sukkah is a makif. The sukkah embraces the person, but in a very superficial, in a very all-encompassing manner. However, the daled minim, which each one expresses another aspect of the person and so on and so forth, they draw down whatever is accomplished in the sukkah into the person in a pnimiyistic manner. In other words, it brings the makif to pnimi. And now we can appreciate why the Torah specifies by the daled minim, lochem, to you, because this is bringing everything down, all these holy aspects into you, to you, with you. And this is the reason, another reason, says the Rebbe, another thing we can appreciate, why when we take the daled minim, we make an emphasis to not just shake it, but to bring it to our hearts, because this has to bring it into the person, and it should permeate the person, through the person's emotions, become internalized and one with the person. By fusing these two aspects together, we achieve a full, comprehensive effect. What is it? See, the typical avodah of a person, true that it comes from the pnimius of the person, and it connects to the pnimius of the person, but because of that, it is limited by nature. It comes by bedida of a hagbala, because every person is limited, no matter how holy one is, but one is a person, a human being, is limited by nature. But the avodah of Mesidus Nefesh, that is l'mayla medida v'hagbala. That goes beyond any whatsoever limitation. However, the flip side of it is it doesn't permeate the person in a pnimius. So you have that limitless aspect, but it doesn't fully permeate the person. But when you bring them both together, you channel them both down together. In other words, you bring Mesidus Nefesh, and you bring it into the avodah of the person, then you gain two things. Number one, this mode of the Mesidus Nefesh becomes absorbed in the person. And number two, this indicates the lack of limitation in the idea of Mesidus Nefesh. Otherwise, you can say the Mesidus Nefesh is great, but it's something which is limited. Because since it's infinite, it cannot really connect to the person. But here, when you're able to fuse the two, like we just explained, you take the idea of sukkah, and it gets brought down, and it gets drawn down, and it connects to the person through the daled minim, then you have both, you fuse both together. You have brought l'mayla medida v'hagbala, you brought Mesidus Nefesh from the etzem nefesh into one's medida v'hagbala. And now we can appreciate that opinion that holds that Simchas Beis HaShe'eva began only on the second night after the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog. See, just as the ultimate level of avodah of Mesiras Nefesh is that when it comes in a pnimius, so too the ultimate simcha is when, number one, when it comes from something that is tangible, something that you can actually feel. That's true joy. Because if it's joy that's abstract, it's not real joy. But also, when is it real joy? Is when the joy is a limitless joy, when it's an infinite joy. Where do you see the ultimate simcha? Is from something which comes from higher than seichel, but it's dafka when it comes into seichel, something that comes from beyond intellect that you're able to absorb through avodah into your intellect. And therefore we can appreciate, according to this opinion, why Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, this great joy, happened only after they already performed the mitzvah of Daled Minim, because now you have the aspect of Sukkah, which began on the first night, which is Makif, and you brought it to the Daled Minim into Pnimi, and now at night you're going back to that Makif, but you can appreciate it, you can enjoy it, it's tangible, and therefore it's called for the ultimate Simcha, as you can appreciate it. However, the Poyel, in actuality, the halacha is not so. The halacha is that we start the first night. Why? Because even before the v'lakachtem lachem, you should take to you, meaning even before the Daled Minim, but we know that the mitzvah of Sukkah actually begins as soon as Yom Tov begins. It begins at night. In other words, before we have the Pnimi, we already have the Makif. And in a general sense, this is very parallel. This is synonymous with the idea of the Nisuch HaMayim, of the pouring of the water, of the drawing of the water. And therefore, the halacha remains that we start the Simcha immediately the first night. However, still, the Simcha is not in full swing, not on its ultimate level, until you reach the second night, which then you have that fusion that we explained, the fusion between Mesiras Nefesh, that is typically abstract, is beyond any pnimius, and the connection to the avodah of the person, which comes down by pnimius, and now you have a true fusion. So now the simcha takes on a whole different meaning, and it goes to a whole different level. And this, says the Rebbe, will help us understand something. Nowadays, that we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, we see that the custom is, and we all know the Rebbe was the one who really spearheaded this custom, is that we start the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva already immediately from the first night of Yom Tov, the first night of Sukkos. Why? You see, because, in other words, there's no debate. Why? See, because when it comes to the times of the Beis HaMikdash, indeed, people did achieve the revelation of godliness in a pnimiistic manner. Yes, there was such a thing. People did experience this holiness and the Kedusha, and it permeated into them. They actually connected to it. Whereas now, in the times of Golus, our main focus is not so much on the pnimius. Our main focus is on the avodah of Mesiras Nefesh. We don't see. We don't see. We're not privy to this type of revelations. We're not privy to this type of connection. Moreover, our avodah is typically Mesiras Nefesh, as we have to always fight off all the scorners, and always fight off all the temptations and distractions that are out there in the world, and they're constant. And therefore, by us, the ikar is the Nisuch HaMayim. In other words, by us, the ikar is, we don't even have to wait. There's no opinion even to wait for the second day, for the second night, after we've already absorbed it. Because by us, yes, in a sense, it's superficial, because we are constantly in a mode of Mesiras Nefesh. And therefore, we start already in the first night, which is also expressed in the mitzvah of Sukkah itself, as we mentioned before. Now, you can ask, if that's the case, then it seems clear that the total advantage was in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, our avodah seems to be nothing compared to that. Says the Rebbe, no, from a certain aspect, from a certain perspective, Dafka now, specifically now, because we don't have all those revelations, because we cannot connect on that level of the koiches apnimim, therefore, the revelation of Mesiras Nefesh is higher and beyond what was the revelation of Mesiras Nefesh in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, true, we are lacking that connection to the Pnimius. But because of that, our connection to the Makiv, our connection to the Mesiras Nefesh, our connection to the Etzem Haneshama, into the essence of the soul, is above and beyond what was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, the revelation of the joy that comes as a result of this avodah is even greater than the joy that they were able to experience in the time of the Beis Hamikdash.